Hey guys, welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show for Wednesday night. It's kind of late already. We don't have a lot of time, but we don't really need it today, so doesn't matter too much. That's why I pushed it back. We still don't have lineups for all the games, but we do have them for most of the games, at least that I'm interested in. Probably most of the games that everyone's interested in. Yeah, there's really not a lot to say tonight. There's 4 games. We had 5, but the Yankees-Nationals game has been rained out. So I guess I'll kind of recap what the situation is with the expensive pitchers, where we have Justin Verlander in LA and Chris Sale at home against the A's. I still think this is a no-brainer in favor of Chris Sale. He's a little bit cheaper. He's at home. Verlander's on the road. Sale is a better overall pitcher than Verlander, despite what ERA has said to this point in the season. Sale's numbers are reliably better over a longer period of time. And I think he actually still has better numbers this year. But even regardless of that, if they were equivalent pitchers, it's just so much better of a situation for Sale against a decent offense in Oakland, but also an offense that strikes out a good amount. Verlander is facing a very good offense in LA, the Angels offense, and it's a road game, and the Angels don't strike out very much. So much better matchup for Sale. I think he's a better pitcher, and he's cheaper, and he's at home. So this is a definite no-brainer for me. I'm going to have 0 Justin Verlander exposure and a lot of Chris Sale. The only circumstance where I think it could make sense to use 2 guys that are this expensive in a situation like this with only 4 games is if you had a contrarian stack that was cheap. But the only cheap stacks tonight are the teams that are facing Sale and Verlander. Their opponents are cheap. For the most part, though, there is one cheaper offense where if you wanted to use them, it could make sense to go Verlander and Sale together, and that's the Marlins against Walker Buehler. They should have very low ownership. I don't know if it'll be so abnormally low, though, because there are only 4 games here, and it's just not great expected output. The Marlins offense is bad. Walker Buehler has definitely been good this year. But if you really like both Sale and Verlander, you could fit a Marlin stack with them. That's not a route I'll be going tonight, but I think, 20 lineups, maybe you could have one lineup like that where it's a Marlin stack with the expensive pitchers, but not even close to my favorite strategy tonight. I think that if the Marlins do well, you probably do want to have the 2 best pitchers on the slate in that lineup. So I think it could make sense to do that. But for the most part, I think Chris Sale is the guy to use the most of. I think Garrett Richards is the strongest pricing value. He's way down at 5,800. So even in a tough matchup, Richards is good enough and cheap enough that I think it's completely fine to use him against Houston. George Springer played last night, so he should be back tonight too. We don't have an Astros lineup yet. But even with him in there, that's just such a downgrade in price for Richards. And I think it's just because there are a lot of good pitchers on this slate and they just kind of price them in order. Although Richards definitely should cost more than, let's say, Tyler Chatwood, but he doesn't for whatever reason. So Richards is my favorite value, but the offenses to use aren't that expensive. So I still think it makes sense to have more of Sale than of Garrett Richards. But I definitely like those 2 the most. I think the combination of the 2 leaves plenty of salary to kind of use whatever offense you want. So that's a little bit of the issue for me with Walker Buehler, where he's kind of in between. We're playing Buehler and Richards leaves too much salary on the table. There aren't really that expensive of hitters to pay up for unless you want to kind of just cram in all the expensive hitters tonight. But I don't really love the value in that at all. And then Buehler and Sale kind of straps you for cash where you can't really make too many stacks that are that expensive, unless you're going with a more contrarian team that isn't expensive, or if you're going with the back end of a lineup. So I think a Sale-Buehler combination is worth having, but I much prefer Sale and Richards, and I think that that's the priority in terms of 2 pitchers to target. So Sale number 1, Richards number 2, Buehler a distant 3. And then with Caleb Smith not being on the slate anymore, he was scratched from his start. I think Cahill into the picture a bit more. 5,100 is just a really low price for Cahill. With the high strikeouts and high walks. And it's a tough matchup in Boston for sure. But Cahill actually isn't really walking anyone this year. It's been 4 starts, so I guess I'd look more to last year where he walked almost 5 batters per 9 innings. But Cahill's been incredibly good in his 4 starts, almost 12 Ks per 9, 2.25 walks per 9 innings. He's getting 60% ground balls. The swinging strike percentage is 16%. So the strikeout rate certainly looks sustainable based on what he's done so far. The question is just sample size and how much to buy into these 4 starts. But Cahill was really good in the first half of last season. So at the very least, I think it's worth using him. I don't know how much, and I probably wouldn't have had him very much at all if not for Caleb Smith getting ruled out, because he was only 6,500 and he might be a better pitcher than Cahill. A better matchup than Cahill had in Boston is definitely a tough matchup compared to at home against the Dodgers. But without Smith there, I think it could make sense to have some Sale with Cahill lineups, especially because the Red Sox should be chalky, and it's not really justified given how good Cahill's been this year. Like, the Red Sox could be the highest owned offense tonight, and they're facing a pitcher who's just been unbelievably good. So I think Cahill makes sense for the leverage if the opposing hitters are going to have ownership, but I also think that price is just way too cheap for him against basically anyone, considering how good he's been this year and how good he was last year at times. So I wouldn't have a lot of Cahill, but I think having him about the same amount as Buehler makes sense. So I'm thinking, just to put rough numbers on it, something like 90% of Chris Sale, 70% of Garrett Richards, and then like 20% each of Walker Buehler and Trevor Cahill. So like 4 lineups out of 20 for each of those guys. I think they're both worth having in the mix, but Sale and Richards are still the priorities. So offense isn't going to take too long either. There are really just 3 spots I like and then 1 contrarian spot. So the 3 best offenses, we have the Dodgers getting the obvious value boost with Caleb Smith being scratched, and now it's Eliezer Hernandez who's taking his place. Hernandez hasn't really gotten any MLB experience, just a couple of innings. He spent most of his minor league career so far at lower levels. I'm getting his numbers in front of me now, but I don't actually think he's pitched at AAA yet. I think he was called up straight from AA to the majors. I will confirm that in 1 second. All right, let's see. Yeah, so Hernandez has not pitched at AAA. He actually only has 9 AA innings. And he's his minor league career from 2012 to 2017 at A ball and rookie ball. So he's pitched at very low levels, and he's showed some promise at those levels. But the idea that he's ready to be a major league starter at this point is a little ridiculous. So the Dodgers offense against him, it's a lot better of a spot than against Caleb Smith, who's been very good this year. And the Dodgers are just not very expensive. So that's the clear value on the slate. I think they're worth having probably the most. They should be chalky, but I'm not too worried about ownership because I think there are 4 teams probably that are going to kind of spread out the ownership, and I have no interest in the Red Sox tonight. So I'm not too overwhelmed by the Dodgers ownership, even though some of their top of the order players could be 25, 30, maybe even over 30% owned. It's a small slate, so there are going to be a lot of hitters that are in the 20 to 30% range. So I like the Dodgers a lot against Hernandez. And then one other thing of note about them is that the Marlins don't have a single left-handed reliever on their active roster. So their current active roster has 3 lefties. It's Wei-Yin Chen, who started yesterday. He's not going to pitch. Caleb Smith, who was scratched tonight, he's not going to pitch. And then Jarlene Garcia threw 84 pitches in a start on Saturday. The odds of Garcia coming in as a lefty specialist in this game seem very, very low, considering he's been in the starting rotation for the last few weeks. And he just pitched on Saturday as a starter. So basically what we're looking at is an all right-handed bullpen, and that means a very low chance that Chase Utley and Jock Peterson get pinch hit for. That's always a concern with the Dodgers, is that guys get pinch hit for when lefties come in, or I guess the other way around when righties come in. But we don't have that problem tonight. I don't think we can really – I don't think there's a realistic chance of seeing any lefties enter the game on the mound for the Marlins. So Utley and Jock should be in there as much as they can be in there, barring injury or I guess a blowout where they get lifted for some other reason or a pinch runner, but they're not going to be situationally pinch hit for, at least not the same way as normal, where a lefty comes in the game and the Dodgers go to a right-handed batter. So that's a big boost for the Dodgers, and they're cheap, and it's a really good matchup. The only downside of this is that it's a pitcher's park they're playing in, but basically everything else sets up perfectly. So definitely like the Dodgers a lot. And then I don't have to say too much about this next game for offense because it's just a really good spot for both teams. We have a pretty bad pitching matchup between Tyler Chatwood and Brandon McCarthy. The Cubs and Braves both have good offenses. There's very little chance of rain. I think there's some, and I don't know, maybe there's like a 1% chance the game gets rained out. But this is the best spot overall for offense in terms of expected output. And I certainly like both sides of the game probably about equally. I've looked at this enough times now that I should know where I stand, but I think Chatwood and McCarthy are about equally bad. The two teams both have about average bullpens, and the two offenses are about the same, and they're very similarly priced too. So I'm kind of looking at having the exact same amount of exposure of the Dodgers, the Cubs, and the Braves. I think those are the top three offenses. I think you can rotate them just evenly. And if I had to pick one, I think it's the Dodgers for their pricing value, but you don't have to pick one. You can make as many lineups as you want. So I like all of those three the most. And then one more offense to mention, and I guess aside from questions, there really isn't too much to say here. But I think the Angels against against Justin Verlander are a good enough offense and priced down enough that they are definitely in a good spot tonight, and no one is going to use them. We have the Angels lineup out now, and Shohei Ohtani is in there. So boost on offense for Ohtani playing. Trout's leading off, and they've bumped Cozart and Kinsler down in the order. The only annoying thing is that Albert Pujols is playing, and Albert Pujols is pretty bad. But Trout, Ohtani, Upton, they're all way cheaper than usual, and Simmons is cheaper. Cozart and Kinsler are actually below 3K. So are Calhoun and Maldonado, but not as notable for those two guys. But the Angels are priced way down for the matchup. So for a cheap stack, I think they are worth using, especially given how low owned they're going to be. So I'd probably have, let's say, 30% Dodgers, 30% Cubs, 30% Braves, and then the last 10% for the Angels, something like that. I think that would still be overweight to the field on all three teams, all four teams. Let's see. For plugs, it's kind of just going to be fitting in the other guys from the other teams in the lineup where I guess you're not using that specific stack. So Albert Almora in a Braves stack, or Mike Trout in any other stack. Jock Peterson, I think, is the outfielder that makes the most sense tonight because he's batting second. He's the cheapest of most of the plugs, and we don't have to worry too much about him getting pinch hit for. So it's really just I'm targeting those four offenses, and I think just taking plugs from the Dodgers, Cubs, and Braves and using them in the other team's stacks, I think that's the easiest way to go. I think you could plug some Marlins hitters just because they're cheap, and I think Buehler is a little bit overrated. So in lineups that don't have Buehler, I'm fine with Justin Bour, Brian Anderson, Starlin Castro. JT Realmuto seems fine too. But for the most part, I think just stick to the Dodgers, Cubs, and Braves hitters, and then maybe a few Angels stacks. Going back to pitching, it's Sale and Richards. That's the number one combination for me, with a heavier lean on Sale. And then I think Buehler's just a little bit underpriced, and Cahill should be a good source of tournament leverage, and he's also underpriced. So it's those four pitchers in that order, and then offense, just Dodgers, Cubs, and Braves. That's the focus. They are going to be pretty chalky, but so will the Red Sox, and I think there's value in just avoiding the Red Sox against Cahill, and the Angels as a contrarian team too. I mentioned the Marlins at the very beginning, and I guess you could go Verlander Sale with Marlins because that kind of just fits, but that's not really something I want to do, and I think the Angels will have less ownership actually than the Marlins. And the Astros should be fairly contrarian too, but I just don't think it's a particularly good spot for them. And they're not really priced down for a tougher than usual matchup against Garrett Richards. So I don't know, if you want to throw in an Astros stack because you really like them, I think there are worse plays. Like, I think the Astros are a better pick tonight than the Red Sox, at least for ownership, but I don't like either team. So that is going to do it. Yeah, nothing else to add. This is a pretty straightforward slate. and hope everyone does well with it. And should be back tomorrow, I think. Yeah, back tomorrow. So good luck tonight.